dropped it in a bucket, touchdown!
Backer transition three, bang!
He's bends it like Beckham. Are you kidding?
Hello and welcome back for episode 47 of White Noise Sports with Tanner White. We are officially in Super Bowl week. Last week we predicted all things Super Bowl 59, checked back in on the absurdities of the whole Jimmy Butler saga, and pondered Brittany Griner signing with the Atlanta Dream. This week I'm just going to do trade talk and run that into the ground because you and I know that's the thing in the news cycle right now. The NBA trade deadline was this Thursday, February 6th. I'll try and hit on as many of those 11th hour type of deals as I can, but I gotta argue most of the best or most ridiculous deals came the couple of days before. Obviously the most jaw-dropping trade I've heard of in at least the last couple of years is Luka Doncic for Anthony Davis, so let's not waste anybody's time. The Utah Jazz were also part of this deal, but nothing super interesting happened for them. They just racked up 2 second-rounders for this year. The analogies made from other leagues about this trade are hysterical. Josh Allen for Matthew Stafford and a first-round pick. Mike Trout for Bobby Witt Jr. Patrick Kane for Austin Matthews. Look, where do we even start? I think for the less initiated, we will go back to the background on their careers a little bit. Anthony Davis is 31 in year 13 in the league, and he's one of the great two-way players the league's ever seen. He's often a center where he provides a little bit more defensive value, but he was listed a lot as a power forward the first 7 years or so of his career with the Pelicans. He's right around 7 foot, averages 2.4 blocks and 24 points for his career, 5 All-NBA nods. He would have a good chance at being a Hall of Famer if he retired right now. That said, the knock on him's always been staying healthy, but when he's on the floor and you pair him with a passer like LeBron with LA, he's good enough to win MVP. Luka Doncic is a 25-year-old from Slovenia. He was drafted by the Hawks and traded to the Mavs on draft night as a teenager. I always feel a little sympathy for those kind of teen megastars and the hype and the expectations they have to carry around, and yet, Luka came out, won Rookie of the Year, and he's been All-NBA first team 5 years in a row. I'm pretty sure the draft night trade worked out. Even more notably, Luka won his first scoring title last year at 33.9 points a game. He hasn't won an MVP, but he did carry the Mavs to the finals last year. That's one of the biggest reasons why it's so shocking that Dallas would even shop him around. In 6 years there, he'd already established himself as one of the best players on the planet and one of the best players the franchise has ever had. The question everybody wants to ask is, now what? The prevailing narrative on the internet, which is obviously the only one that matters, we all know that, is that the Lakers got a generational steal. Like every other trade, it's pretty curious to try and determine that before either of the main pieces have actually played a game for their new team. For the immediate aftermath, I think you have to mention that Luka hasn't played since Christmas Day with a calf injury. He was on the bench for the Lakers-Clippers game on Tuesday night, but he wasn't ready to suit up yet. Luka had never played in less than 60 games in his career to this point, but even if he played every game from the next one forward, he would be short of that this year. Anthony Davis is ironically in the middle of one of his best and healthiest seasons, having played in 42 of 47 before the trade. He did have an abdominal strain the week before the deal. I think that's totally coincidental, and it didn't really factor into the Lakers' plans. Everyone believes Luka has multiple MVPs and scoring titles in his future, seeing as he's just gotten better every single year up to this point. They also believe that Anthony Davis is very much on the downslope of his career, even though this year's numbers don't back that up at all. Are you feeling yet why narratives are kind of useless? Things to watch for on the floor. First for Dallas, Max Christie was a throw-in for the Lakers in the trade. Does he hold down a starting spot and give you 30 minutes or so per night of quality guard play? If he does, I think he might be the best side piece in this trade. 2, whenever AD gets back on the floor, will they run a fair amount of lineups with 2 bigs? My thought is they could have AD at center pretty often and have one of their other bigs. You've got a couple of 6'10" guys with Dallas, Daniel Gafford or Dwight Powell, who are more likely to be a power forward. It's something neither of them are probably best at, but my guess is it would be better for the team as a whole. Dallas is just not going to score 140 points every night anymore. They're not built for it. So they really got to go all in on the defensive end. Best way to do that is have an AD as your number one rim protector. Davis really is an unstoppable offensive player when he wants to be, but I really believe him too when he says he's a defense-first player. That's what he wants to do. Now what to watch for with the Lakers. Obviously, Luka needs to get back on the floor quick as possible, look like an MVP candidate right away when he does. One big conspiracy theory that I'm actually going to lean into a little bit is that Luka's weight was a big problem, and it's been holding him back recently. The Mavs front office was rumored to be incensed by him. I hope this is true. Reportedly tipping the scales at as heavy as 270 pounds this year, 40 pounds up from his listed weight to start the season. If that's the case, he's hiding it fairly well on his body, right? But he also outright denied it on Tuesday in his intro press conference. It would be a little bit shocking if that kind of superstar could gain that much weight and have it go unnoticed. He also played the most minutes of anybody in the league last year, and Anthony Davis, quite interestingly, was second in the league in total minutes. Both of these guys have the broad shoulders and the ability to put a whole franchise on their back, right? They just do it in really different ways. There's also the Lakers' defense, or lack thereof, to think about. To their credit, they realized that obviously trading AD away was going to knock their defense down a couple of pegs. They traded Dalton Connect, their first-round pick from this past year, and Cam Reddish for the Hornets center Mark Williams. He's a young, long 7-footer that, of course, is not going to be at that same caliber of defender yet, but at least on paper can kind of plug into Anthony Davis's spot a little bit. You got to think, who do the Lakers always get dominated by in the playoffs? Nikola Jokic, who was the one defender that they could usually put on Jokic to slow him down. Exactly, it was AD. No one's talking too much about the other players involved because they're just kind of insignificant. But for journalistic integrity, let's do it. I mentioned the Lakers gave up Max Christie. They also tossed in a first-round pick for 2029, which is another year that doesn't sound real, and that pick will probably get traded again before we get there. Max Christie, like AD, played 1 year in college. Hence, he's in year 3 in the NBA, and he's still only 21 years old. That's the one thing Dallas should be happy about. They have plenty of time to kind of make a project out of him, develop him. He had started right around 50% of the Lakers' games this year, played 25 minutes a game. He was just not very effective as a two-guard. LeBron and Austin Reeves are the real ball handlers on that team, to the point Christie's only averaged 1 assist a game for his career. He's a 37% three-point shooter, which is a hair higher than Luka, and he did start the first game the Mavs played after the trade, so he might have the biggest role of his career the rest of this season. The throw-ins from the Mavericks were Maxi Kleber and Markieff Morris. Kleber is in year 7, and he was only a full-time starter in 2020. At least he's a big power forward, I guess. Markieff Morris is also a power forward, though. This is where it gets kind of weird. And Morris is 35 with his best days way behind him. Poor shooter. In the first 5 years of his career or so, he was notably above average as a defender, but not anymore. You don't usually play for 9 different teams because everybody wants you. It's usually kind of the opposite. It would be surprising for both Morris and Kleber to be rostered at the end of the season with LA, especially because they would likely have similar roles. Of course, Luka is the best piece in this trade and has the highest ceiling by far. LA is 5th in the standings in the West, while the Mavs are 8th. That means they would be in the play-in tournament if the season ended today. And now we got to zoom out for the rest of the season, of course. The Lakers have to go all in to win one more championship with LeBron this year, and then he might be tempted to pull a Peyton Manning to ride off into the sunset on a high note. On the other side, maybe the Mavs think getting an injury-prone, almost 32-year-old Anthony Davis is building for the future. Kinda doesn't seem that way, but I guess we'll find out if they can get hot and make a run with him. Bizarre, crazy, ridiculous, chaotic trade, but one of the most fun ones I've seen in any sport in a long time. Quick whip around on the rest of the association. The second biggest trade deadline deal has to be between the Spurs and Bulls. There were 3 teams, 7 players, and 7 draft picks in all, which is kind of exhausting, so let's skip to the good parts. Zach LaVine and 6 total draft picks to the Kings, 3 of which are first-rounders. De'Aaron Fox to the Spurs, and the Bulls getting fleeced with basically just 3 bench players coming back for LaVine. The biggest addition has to be De'Aaron Fox to San Antonio. Victor Wembanyama is, of course, an alien for them. For a team that had some of the lowest scoring output from starting guards, they could easily shoot close to the top now. Fox dropped a 60 bomb in November of this year against Minnesota. Wemby's still going to be the number one option, and rightly so, but you couldn't pair two more complementary players together. Fox has called himself the fastest player in the league, and 57% of NBA GMs last year voted him the fastest player with the ball. He's going to create more space and transition opportunities for everyone in San Antonio, and he could shoot Wemby into the stratosphere. Jimmy Butler is finally getting his change of scenery too. Sigh. There were murmurs on Tuesday and Wednesday this week that he might reconcile with the Heat, but at the deadline he pulled a Kevin Durant and signed with the Warriors. He even got a contract extension, which sets a precedent for star players that I just don't think I like. Jimmy gets benched, thrice suspended, throws a fit, and the Warriors think, we know what'll straighten him out, 2 years and $121 million. Although I did have the Warriors on my short list for him, Jimmy was also rumored to not be willing to sign an extension if he did go there. So the disinformation cycle continues. The Warriors are a game under 500 at the time of recording, by the way. It sounds good to add a big-name veteran, but their championship odds are no better than they were before, and they had to trade away Andrew Wiggins, their number 2 scorer. 3 other teams besides Golden State and Miami were involved, but don't be surprised if the outcome is just a wash for everybody. The NFL offseason is getting nuts because the Rams are going to trade Cooper Kupp. Of course, I thought they were going to do that at the deadline during the season, but now they're for real. A Super Bowl MVP, a receiving triple crown, almost 8,000 yards deep for his career, and the team doesn't want him back. You know what? For a slower white receiver, a third-round pick out of an FCS school, Kupp has been pretty awesome. I really wish that the prevailing thought wasn't that his career was done, but let me tell you something. Whatever deal he gets, I will almost guarantee that he overperforms the value. He'll be 32 when next season starts, which is an age that most receivers don't even reach. Many of them are retired by then. But what I saw watching him this year tells me he really is not diminished almost at all. Let's talk about why. So this will not be shocking or controversial. His game has never been about straight line speed. Yet, Kupp can still break huge plays. He's not tight end size, but he blocks like one. He's not the number one option in the Rams offense anymore by any means, not even close, but he carries himself like one. He is fundamentals incarnate. He does not make mistakes, doesn't drop passes, doesn't care at all about getting the ball or not. That's why there should be 31 teams calling about him and asking all at once. Historically, the best thing to do with receivers at this age is go year by year with their contract. Any more than 1 year and you're really taking a risk on them regressing. With that in mind, and the additional news that the Rams are willing to eat some of his salary to get a deal done, who might be willing to take this sort of 1-year flyer on Cooper Kupp? At the NFL deadline, I thought the Lions would be one of the top teams in the mix, and I still do. The Lions have 2 young receivers that they love, Amon-Ra St. Brown and Jamison Williams. St. Brown was top 5 in pretty much every receiving category, and Williams had 1,000 yards in 15 games. Beyond that, the wide receiver room only had 639 yards, with no one having a strong grip on that number 3 receiver spot. Yes, Detroit had lots of success throwing to tight ends and running backs, but Kupp would fit in beautifully. There are going to be question marks and scheme changes, seeing as their offensive coordinator Ben Johnson is now the Bears head coach, but their offensive line is still great, and it should stay mostly intact. They still have maybe the best running back duo with Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery, and Kupp is one of the best blocking receivers the league has ever seen. Of course, he'd be a reliable slot option, but I think he could upgrade the run game like crazy. Other teams that could really use his skill set, how about the Commanders? Terry McLaurin often feels like their only option at receiver. It's the whole organization's number 1 duty to give Jaden Daniels everything he needs to keep winning next year, and a veteran target is definitely on the list. Washington was 4th in rushing already this year, 149 yards a game. They could be even better if they incorporated the kind of motions and condensed sets with Kupp close to the tackle box and use him as a run blocker just like Sean McVay's been doing with him his whole career. The Ravens also have a history of making moves like this, bringing in accomplished older receivers as complementary options. They, of course, led the whole league in rushing, and there would be no pressure on Kupp to stand out. He could just be his usual kind of quiet self, go about his business. If it turned out that they needed him to take on a bunch of targets, he would obviously do just fine. The Bills are the last landing spot that I think is fairly likely. They need players with postseason experience. Bad. They need to get over that boogeyman that is Patrick Mahomes. They need to win a Super Bowl while Josh Allen is still young, and they can still afford to keep their whole core together. Kupp is due to make $20 million this year, but after any potential trade, I'm guessing the acquiring team could probably restructure that and save some salary cap for this year. Myles Garrett, the Browns' defensive end, is the next megastar to demand a trade, citing how badly he wants to win a championship. He's given Cleveland 8 of the more dominant years a D-lineman's ever had. He went number 1 overall in 2016. Since then, 102.5 sacks, Defensive Player of the Year last year, 6-time All-Pro, and they're already fitting him for a gold jacket. He will be a Hall of Famer. He's one of those cases of a player who should, again, be made available to all 31 other teams, because I can't imagine a team that doesn't need him. Whether he's your only elite pass rush threat or he becomes half of a great duo, he's going to dominate, very, very effective against the run, and gets tons of TFLs. Sometimes he had some good running mates in Cleveland, some other good defensive linemen to play with him, and sometimes he didn't, and his numbers were identical either way. I do hope that he lands with a really good team and has a chance to make a run at a Super Bowl, because there aren't many more deserving players. Absolute freak. And that's all for what turned into the Trade Talk episode. Whatever you think is going to happen, whatever would make the most sense, let's just all prepare for the inevitability that that's not going to line up with reality. I'm still fairly certain that the Luka AD trade was real and not a figment of our collective imagination, but you can hopefully see where I'm coming from. I'm going to officially declare this was the most interesting week of trade news the entire year. Why? I'm not 100% sure. I figured the NFL could at least wait until after the Super Bowl, and MLB wasn't even at the point where pitchers and catchers were reporting for spring training. There were more NBA trades that I didn't even hit on. Brandon Ingram from the Pelicans to the Raptors, Chris Middleton from the Bucks to the Wizards. You're talking franchise icons, and great players, all of them. But every league is a business. Every team is a buyer and a seller, more so in the NBA than in other leagues. Seriously, I could have made a 6-hour episode on every team involved in every trade at the deadline, every draft pick changing hands, the other big NFL rumors. Sometimes you just gotta pare it down. Super quickly, I want to run down NFL honors winners and how my picks fared, because I'm recording Friday, having already watched the NFL honors. I went 4 out of 7 on the major awards, and I missed the biggest one. But Joshua Patrick Allen finally gets his first MVP. I know Lamar was better, statistically, in every way that matters except for wins. But Josh just had more MVP moments and more impressive wins under his belt, namely beating the league's 2 juggernauts, the Lions and the Chiefs. Offensive and defensive rookie of the year were formalities. Jaden Daniels and Jared Verse, super easy. Defensive player of the year was Patrick Surtain. I got that one. Little bit closer maybe than we thought, not a huge runaway. Definitely cool to see a corner get that, and more so one who's just such a fabulous run defender, because today's corners, they really don't do that. Offensive Player of the Year was Saquon Barkley, as tends to happen when one rushes for 2,000 yards in 16 games. Kevin O'Connell did take Coach of the Year over Dan Campbell. I took a flyer on Campbell in my predictions, but I can admit, O'Connell had the lesser team, lower expectations, and he also led a bigger improvement. Finally, Comeback Player of the Year went to Joe Burrow over Sam Darnold. Look, lame choice. Burrow really did not have anywhere near as compelling a story, but I expect that the league is going to revisit and update the guidelines or the criteria for this one for next year. Joe Burrow is an absolute superstar, and in any normal year, he would have probably won MVP, but at least he got some recognition because he led the league in yards and touchdowns. I've had better marks on predictions, of course, not thrilled with 4 out of 7, but at least this year was unpredictable, which made it pretty awesome. And that's all I have for this week. A bit of a marathon in length, but it had to be done, and don't be surprised if there's some more monster NFL and MLB roster news next week. Whatever else catches my eye is always on the table. Remember, you can always feel free to hit me on my socials if you have an idea for me. This has been episode 47 of White Noise Sports with Tanner White. Thanks for joining me.
He dropped it in a bucket. Touchdown!
Backer transition 3, bang!
He's bends it like Beckham. Are you kidding?